I never expected to feel anything walking into that apartment. I'd been in dozens. Hundreds, maybe. Some were cluttered, some were clean, some so bleak they clung to your skin like mildew. But that man's home. It was different. Even before the door opened, I could sense it. The stale air, the faint odor of rotting food that had escaped through the cracks. When he finally opened the door, I was met with a cloud of something far more suffocating than decay. Loneliness. Thick, heavy, years-old loneliness. He looked startled when he saw me. Mr. Akira Tanaka? I asked gently, tightening the strap of my pink apron around my waist. He nodded. His lips moved as if to speak, but no sound came. He just stepped back to let me in. The hallway was narrow, lined with discarded grocery bags and half-crushed plastic bottles. The floor hadn't been vacuumed in months. Dishes were piled in the sink, forming a fossilized layer of takeout residue and congealed sauces. His futon lay in the corner of the living room, unmade, its sheets yellowed with time and dampness. Still, I smiled. I'll start in the kitchen, I said softly. Don't worry, I've seen worse. That was a lie. I hadn't. Not like this. I moved quietly. I always do. No harsh movements, no loud words. Some of my clients needed more than a clean home. They needed not to be startled, not to feel judged. Mr. Tanaka was one of them. I slipped on my gloves and turned on the tap, letting the sound of running water soothe the awkward silence. Behind me, I could feel his eyes, watching, hesitant, but intensely present. There was a kind of hunger in the way he stood there, not sexual. Not yet. Something deeper, the hunger of a man who hadn't spoken to another soul in days, maybe weeks, who hadn't heard laughter that wasn't coming from a television set. I crouched to scrub a sticky patch of oil near the stove, and I could almost hear his breath catch. The knot of my apron tightened around my waist, hugging my hips more snugly than I realized. I'd chosen this apron because it was functional, durable, but as I felt his eyes linger on my back, I wondered if maybe it wasn't just functional after all. By the second visit, I could feel the air had changed. He had cleared the entrance for me, a small gesture, but monumental in its intent. He had folded his blankets. A weak attempt, perhaps, but he tried. Good morning, I greeted him. He nodded. Morning. Got some tea, if you'd like. That was new, I accepted, sitting for just a moment before beginning my work. He watched me as I folded his shirts, each one worn and thinning at the seams. I touched the fabric gently, not just to fold, but to feel the life that had once worn them. It was then I noticed the way his gaze softened. Not predatory, not aggressive, but curious, hopeful. I moved to vacuum the living room, slipping the nozzle between the couch and the wall. When I bent over, I could feel the slight resistance of my apron tugging against my backside. I knew what I must have looked like. I didn't mind. Maybe he needed to remember he was still a man. The third week, it happened. It had started to rain, just as I was leaving. A sudden, violent downpour. I ran toward the train station, but realized within seconds that my umbrella was useless. Soaked through, shivering and defeated, I turned back. When I rang his bell again, I was dripping wet. My shirt clung to my skin, my bra faintly visible beneath the damp cotton. The apron was plastered against my curves, transparent in places, my hair sticking to my face. I'm so sorry, I said, teeth chattering. It's pouring. He didn't say a word, just reached out and pulled me gently inside. Take a shower, he murmured. I'll get you a towel and something dry. I hesitated, but the warmth of his voice made it feel okay. I nodded and stepped into his bathroom, peeled off my wet clothes, and stood under the hot water. The steam filled the air, but it couldn't hide the heat blooming inside me. Not from the water, but from the memory of his eyes. The way he looked at me, as if I were the only person left in his world. When I emerged, I was wrapped in one of his old t-shirts and a pair of loose sweatpants. Everything smelled like him. Faintly masculine, slightly aged, but oddly comforting. I stepped into the living room and saw him standing there, waiting, his eyes immediately drawn to me. You look good, he said, voice low. I smiled shyly and sat beside him on the couch. Our thighs touched, and though the room was silent, I could feel the tension humming between us like a taut string. Then he reached out. His hand brushed my knee. I didn't move. Instead, I looked up at him, lips slightly parted. The scent of my damp hair drifted upward as I tilted my head. His hand moved slowly, achingly slowly, up my thigh. My breath hissed. I didn't stop him, and when his lips finally met mine, it wasn't awkward or apologetic. It was full of desperate need, not just for touch, but for connection, for life. I didn't go there to fall for anyone. I didn't even go there to feel, but feelings have a way of growing in silence. After that night, after we made love on his creaky old bed, tangled in sheets that still smelled faintly of detergent and old dreams. I expected things to change, awkwardness, guilt, regret. But none of that came. Instead, he opened the door the next week, the same way he always did, with soft eyes, with quiet reverence. "Hello," I whispered. "Come in," he said. We didn't talk about it, not out loud. But every movement between us had changed. When I bent to pick up the laundry, I could feel his gaze warm the back of my neck. When I rinsed the dishes, he stood closer than necessary. When I dusted the shelves, he sometimes touched my waist, lightly, like a memory, and I let him. There's something intoxicating about being wanted, not just physically, but truly wanted, as if your presence has brought air into a room that had forgotten how to breathe. He never demanded anything of me, but when I was near, his whole body leaned in, as if afraid I'd vanish if he blinked. And there were moments, small, flickering ones, that broke the quiet wide open. One afternoon, I finished scrubbing the tiles in the kitchen. My knees were damp from kneeling. I turned to stretch, arching my back unconsciously, and found him there, closer than I'd expected. He didn't touch me, just looked. So I reached for his hand and placed it on my hip. "Still think this is just cleaning?" I teased. He shook his head slowly, his thumb brushing across the fabric of my apron. "I think this is saving me." And then, once more, we let ourselves fall, right there, on the kitchen floor. The sex wasn't perfect. It was raw, unguarded, sometimes clumsy, but it was real. There was no pretense, no expectation, just two people trying to remember what it felt like to be seen, touched, needed. His hands, rough and large, were always so gentle with me, and mine, soft, careful, lingered on the places he'd long neglected: the small of his back, the inner part of his arm, the tender skin along his ribs. He responded with sighs, with murmured apologies for his aging body, for the belly he couldn't quite hide, but I silenced those with kisses. "Don't apologize for being real," I whispered once, my lips pressed to his chest. "You're the most alive thing I've touched in years." We never made it official. He never called me his girlfriend. I never called him my lover. But there was no doubt what we were becoming. After the 5th visit, I started staying longer. Sometimes, after the cleaning was done, we'd sit together on the floor, legs stretched, sipping green tea from mismatched mugs. He began opening up about his wife, about the way her laughter used to fill the house. "She used to hang the laundry just so," he said. Once, tracing the air with his finger, she'd hum while she did it. Sometimes, I'd sit and just listen. I said nothing, just smiled. Then slowly, I reached for his hand. One rainy day, the memory of her felt especially close. He had found an old photo, creased at the corners, faded with time. It showed them in their 20s, standing by a field of sunflowers. "She was beautiful," I whispered, holding the photo gently. He looked at me. "So are you." And when he said it, I knew he wasn't just being kind. He meant it. He saw me, not just as the woman who folded his shirts or scrubbed his sink, but as Kasumi, a woman with her own sorrows, her own past, her own needs. That night, I stayed. It wasn't planned. It wasn't expected. But when he asked, "Would you stay?" his voice barely above a whisper, I nodded. We undressed slowly, without urgency. The familiarity between us now made every button, every soft touch, feel like a sacred ritual. His lips followed the curve of my neck down to my collarbone. My hands found the parts of him he once tried to hide, and together, we relearned how to move, how to give, how to receive. Afterward, I curled into his side, our skin still warm and damp, our fingers intertwined. There was no shame, no regret, only breath and quiet. In the following weeks, everything softened. He began shaving again, started buying fresh fruit. He even opened the curtains. "You're letting light in," I teased once, wiping down the windows. "No," he said, "you did." Sometimes, when I'd be scrubbing the bathroom or folding towels, he'd come up behind me and press his lips to the back of my neck. Nothing more. And yet, it sent ripples through me, every time. Once, as I was wiping the mirror, he stood beside me, our eyes meeting in the reflection. "You know," he said, "I never thought I'd feel this again. Wanting, longing. I thought it had died with her." "It didn't," I whispered. "It was just waiting." We never defined it. There were no declarations, no promises. But I began keeping a small toothbrush in his bathroom. I left a pair of slippers by the